This video is brought to you by MyBookie.ag. What's up, everybody? We are here for the UFC 303 card. It's a good one. Changed a lot. Many pullouts from the main event to the co-main event multiple times. A total of 5 fights got canceled on 303. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler due to a broken toe. The guy who stepped in, Alex Pereira, is willing to fight with broken toes. So, very cool. The co-main event was originally Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. Khalil pulled out. Then it was supposed to be Jamal Hill versus Carlos Ulberg. Then Hill pulled out because of a knee injury. He went back to the studio to quote more about losing to Pereira, which I might make a video on. Then it was supposed to be Ulberg versus Anthony Smith, and Ulberg pulled out, and now Anthony Smith got moved down the card off of the co-main event to fight a middleweight contender in Roman Dolidze. The new co-main event is now Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. They made that fight very shortly, and then the last pullout on the card was Cody Durden, where he was going to be fighting Carlos Hernandez, and now Carlos Hernandez is fighting Tsuruya, one of the best flyweight prospects in the UFC. So give some praise to these fighters stepping up and the UFC for putting on these matchups in such a short amount of time. And this may be my favorite card of all time. Not just because the fights are good, but we got a lot of people on the spectrum. The autistic quality of this card is super entertaining. And I'm talking about like Jiri Prochazka, talking about shaman magic, and that's how Alex Pereira's winning his fights. To Brian Ortega, training by taping his mouth shut, and he's talking about how he wants to purge his neighbors. To Andrei Fili talking about comics and stuff. John Silva speaks in dog language. To Payton Talbott, and I could just go on about him, you know. I love this card, man. And I would have to say that the prospect of the night is 100% Payton Talbott. He's 8-0, looking very good, no Jones, and probably the best performance of his entire career against a very good fighter in Cameron Simon. He is one of the biggest favorites in MMA history, going up against Yanis Ghemmouri, and people are expecting this guy to be a future contender, maybe even a future champion at some point of his career. It's very early to say that for certain, but he has the skills, the power, and just the natural fighting ability that can't really be taught, and that is one of the most important things for any prospect. The stake of the night, the fighter that's in the hottest of waters, is Michelle Waterson Gomez. I don't know. She also has a hyphenated last name. I didn't know that. Just like Ian Machado Garry. I don't really understand that whole thing. Is it because they just don't like their partner's last name or they don't like them that much? I have no idea. Maybe her situation is different than Ian Machado, but it's their life. Whatever. You know, whatever they want to do. Well, she is on a 4-fight loss streak. 1-6 in her last 7 fights. If she loses to Gillian Robertson, that is probably it for Michelle Waterson Gomez, who's right now 38 years old. There's not a lot of flyweights and strawweights that fight that late in their careers, and she's been competing since like 2007, you know, so losing to a much younger opponent is probably not the worst way to go out in your fighting career, because Robertson is a massive favorite going into that fight. The fighter of the night is of course Alex Pereira, the only champion on the card, one of the biggest stars in the UFC, future Hall of Famer, is accomplishing more than 99% of fighters that ever step into that octagon in such a short amount of time. This guy is an absolute mythical legend who is operating with his shaman magic, and maybe that's why he's so good. And maybe that's why most of his opponents do not want to take him to the ground that much. And I expect Jiri to actually try wrestling a lot more for this fight. At least that's where his chances are better than just striking with Pereira. The banger of the night, the most explosive fun fight on the card, is that main event, Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka 2. One of my favorite fights to ever get put together. The first time it was amazing. Both these fighters, everybody loves them. They're very exciting, always going for the knockout. Someone is going to get finished yet again in probably 2 or 3 rounds. Guaranteed fireworks between these two guys. The fight of the night, though, the most skilled, technical, and just overall best fight, in my opinion, is the co-main event. Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. Both guys possess a lot of power in their hands. They're both big for the featherweight division. Tough and aggressive fighters, while also being very technical on the ground. Probably the 2 best jiu-jitsu fighters in the featherweight division. And featherweight has a lot of great grapplers, not just these two. We look at Tsuruya, Volkanovski's good on the ground, Movsar Evloev, Aljamain Sterling, Bryce Mitchell. There's a load of great grapplers in the division, and these two might be the best. So that's going to be an amazing fight. And let's get to the predictions of the first fight on the card. Ricky Simón versus Vinicius Oliveira. Ricky Simón is 31 years old. He's 5'6" in the bantamweight division. He has a 70-inch reach and has a record of 20-5. He's on a 2-loss streak, but before that was on a 5-win streak, even defeating Jack Shore and Rafael Assunção, finishing both of them in the second round. Vinicius Oliveira is 28 years old, 5'9", a bit taller, with a 70.5-inch reach. He's 20-3 professionally and on a 3-fight win streak. coming off one of the biggest knockouts of the year so far against Bernardo Sopai, which still stings, man. That was not fun to watch for me, but you have to give him credit for landing a flying knee like that. And his other 2 wins are also by knockout, and those 2 were in the first round. This guy is very, very powerful. Big guy for the bantamweight division. I think that alone is going to give Ricky Simón a bit of problems, and I do expect him to try to wrestle Oliveira, at least trying to mix up the game on him a bit and not just stand with this guy because he's just way too powerful. He has a great chin, very intimidating pressure, and I think he is big enough to get up from the bottom on Ricky Simón and just damage him with every single shot thrown, from leg kicks to even the jabs. Everything Oliveira lands on him is going to have some kind of effect on Ricky Simón, and I think ultimately Vinicius Oliveira is going to win this fight by a 3rd round TKO. I think Ricky Simón is very tough. He's going to take a lot of the damage, I think, until it just accumulates way too much to where Oliveira drops him and then finishes him on the ground and pound. Then we go to Carlos Hernandez versus Rei Tsuruya. Hernandez is going to get slaughtered by another Japanese fighter back-to-back. Tatsuro Taira destroyed this guy by TKO, not even by a submission, which is what Taira is known for. I mean, this is the same guy who got the Otatsu lock on Alex Perez, beating him with that move. He's an incredible grappler on the ground, or if he has your back while you're standing up. But that right hand he landed on Hernandez before dropping him with the left hook was such a picture-perfect shot. Taira was so confident to finish him with ground and pound and not even go for the submissions and win by that. And in his last fight, Ray also got a win off of ground and pound. He's also a good grappler, still developing into striking a bit, but I do think his overall grappling skill is just going to trump Carlos Hernandez from beginning to end. The kid is 22 years old. He's 5'6" in the flyweight division, has a 68-inch reach, which is pretty long for his height. He's 9-0 and has only gone to a decision 1 time. So I'm going to go with Rei Tsuruya by a 2nd round submission. He's a 4-1 favorite for a very good reason, even coming up on short notice. We're going to Andrei Arlovski versus Martin Buday. I think you pronounce it like Buday or something like that. Arlovski is 45 years old, one of the oldest fighters in the UFC. He might be the oldest. 6'3" with a 77-inch reach. He's 34, 23, and 2 professionally on a 3-loss streak. Before that, he was on a 4-fight win streak. And of course, he's going up against much younger opponents. Martin Buday is 32 years old, 6'4" with a 77-inch reach. He's 13-2 professionally, coming off a loss against Shamil Gaziev, who really put it to him. I mean, Martin Buday didn't have much for Gaziev. He got put in the back foot right away. Gaziev's boxing was just way better than Buday's, and Buday didn't really know how to handle the hooks and the right straight from Gaziev. But before that, he was on a massive win streak, man, defeating Josh Parisian, Jake Collier, even Chris Barnett. Now, I know Martin Buday is a favorite going into this, but I'm actually going to go with Andrei Arlovski. Yes, he's 45 years old. Yes, he should be retired at this point, but I honestly think he is a bit more technical than Martin Buday. And Buday is pretty slow with his hands, doesn't have good defensive technique. He's not as well conditioned as Arlovski is. Arlovski's gone to a decision many times in the last 4 years, and I think he's much better equipped than Buday to go that long in a fight. So the longer the fight goes, I think Arlovski should have a bit of an advantage, considering his veteran experience and just better understanding of fighting in general. I just don't view Martin Buday that highly, man. I just really don't. Even above someone like Arlovski, man. I don't know, maybe I'm just underestimating Buday. Maybe he impresses me with this performance against Arlovski if he wins, but I am picking Arlovski to win it by a decision. Then we go to Michelle Waterson Gomez versus Gillian Robertson. Michelle is 38 years old, 5'3", with a 62-inch reach in the strawweight division, 18-12 professionally on a 4-fight loss streak. Gillian Robertson is 29 years old, 5'5" with a 63-inch reach, 13-8 professionally, coming off of 1 win against Poliana Viana before that loss to Tabitha Ritchie, and really exchanges wins and losses, or at least a 2-win streak and a loss more recently. And I think she's just gonna out-grapple Michelle. Michelle's so much older. She's punching ghosts and shadow boxing more than she's hitting her opponent. One of the worst fighters with distance management I've ever seen. She's got good side kicks and stuff, good traditional kicks coming from her background of karate, but her hands have never really looked that good. And I even think Gillian Robertson can land some punches on her throughout, but I think she's gonna get Michelle to the ground and ultimately submit her in the 2nd or 3rd rounds, and I think Michelle might retire after that. Robertson is very nasty on the ground, man. She's a very good grappler. The only issue she could run into is if Michelle's base is that strong where she could stop takedowns, right? Michelle is very plodding and stuff. She's got a thick base, so it could be quite difficult for Gillian Robertson to knock her off balance with some of her takedowns because she takes you down a lot like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist will do, instead of like a American collegiate wrestler would do. A lot more trips in the clinch and stuff, not too powerful careful with her shots. So Michelle's thick base can definitely be a big defense to Gillian Robertson taken to the ground. But I do think Robertson will get the fight to the ground at some point. And once it gets there, I think she will start to dominate and ultimately submit Michelle Waterson Gomez in the second or third rounds. Then we go to Payton Talbott versus Yanis Ghemmouri. Payton Talbott is 25 years old, 5'10" for the bantamweight division, quite tall, 70-inch reach, 8-0 professionally, 6 knockouts, 1 submission, and 1 decision. And as he said many times, he always tries to go for the knockout, right? He likes that sort of style, aggressively trying to beat down his opponents rather than wrestling and trying to get a submission. Yanis Ghemmouri, though, is 29 years old, 5'9", with a 69-inch reach, very similar, 12-2 professionally, coming off 1 loss against William Gomes, kind of winning with a low blow. All right, he was supposed to hit him with a body kick, but it went a little low, and they scored that as a knockout win for William Gomes. But before that fight, Yanis was on a 9-fight win streak. Some of those split decisions, some of those not entirely impressive, but he was definitely losing to William Gomes. I mean, he definitely looked like a step behind, even with the kicks, which is his best asset. The best thing about Yanis Ghemmouri are his kicks. His boxing isn't on the level of Payton Talbott, technically speaking. Now, anything can happen in a fight, but he does swing those hooks very wide. His defense isn't all there. I mean, even Barriault, who he fought in Brave 2 fights before the UFC, that guy was catching Yanis Ghemmouri with some big shots, man. And Payton Talbott will fire through those same openings with a lot more power, man. Payton Talbott hits like a truck. Very physically strong guy. He even says he walks around a lot heavier than 135. Cuts a lot of weight. Strong takedown defense. Very athletic guy. And he has a good eye for fighting. He sees things in there that many other fighters don't see. Right? His reflexes are on point. It's that thing you can't really train someone to do. They have that natural fighting ability or not. There's several guys that have that, like Islam Makhachev or Alexander Volkanovski or Ilia Topuria. These guys have that natural eye on seeing these openings that a lot of other fighters probably wouldn't see. They catch on to things very quickly in a fight. And you can see Payton Talbott when he fires through these openings and he counters the opponent coming in and stuff. It happens very quickly. And you see it throughout his fighting career. Now, that doesn't automatically mean he's going to be some like top tier fighter, but he has that asset, that one factor that can take him really far if he hones in his defensive technique, because that's the biggest thing going against Talbott. The guy gets hit in the face, man. In some of his earlier fights before the UFC, like, he was egging on his opponent to exchange with him, and he seems to like it in a way whenever he gets hit. It's something similar like young Robbie Lawler. Back in the day, man, when Robbie used to get hit in the face, he used to do the same thing. He would start screaming, he would start taunting the opponent, get him to exchange with him. That's something you see with Payton Talbott whenever he's in a firefight. That's the biggest thing that I can see hurting him later in his career. And Yanis Ghemmouri has some tricky kicks. He's got good high kicks and stuff, good side kicks to the body, good side kicks to the leg, and his hooks come out very wide at weird angles, and those could catch Payton Talbott. But Talbott is a massive favorite for a reason, right? He's one of the biggest favorites statistically in UFC history. Right now, he's like a minus 2,000 almost, and for good reason as well. But I never like the feeling of those kind of odds, man. It's happened so many times for fighters when they're a massive favorite like that, they just lose. It's like mentally they have to rise to a level that accommodates to how fans see them, right? With those kind of odds, people are expecting Talbott to absolutely knock this guy out in like a round, make it easy, completely school this guy, but it's not always like that. So I could see the mental aspect of that getting into Talbott's head, where he has to perform on a different level, and if he doesn't, he kind of failed the fight. And maybe Yanis Ghemmouri could pull it off or makes it a lot closer than people expected. So I'm still gonna go with Payton Talbott. I think technically, with his skills and everything, he should win the fight. And I'm gonna go with a 3rd round TKO. Talbott sometimes is a slow starter. He didn't look like a slow starter against Cameron Simon, but he even said that he's been working on starting faster in his fights. If you look at his other fights before, the guy starts pretty slow, man. So I'm expecting a slower start against Yanis Ghemmouri than he did against Cameron Simon, and that's why I see the later knockout in the 3rd round. Catching Yanis, possibly throwing some kind of kick, he lands a punch over the kick and knocks him out or something like that. Just puts on the pressure on Yanis and just beats him down. Then we go to Charles Jourdain versus John Silva. This is an interesting fight. Very underrated fight on this card. Charles Jourdain is 28 years old, 5'9", with a 69-inch reach in the featherweight division, 15-7-1 professionally, coming off 1 loss against Sean Woodson, a very close decision loss. Before that, he was on 2-fight win streak against Kron Gracie and Ricardo Ramos, submitting that guy in the 1st round. John Silva is 27 years old, 5'7", with a 69-inch reach. He's 12-2 on a 9-fight win streak. He has 9 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 1 decision win. Always going for the knockout. And he's a strange one. They call him Lord Assassin. He barks like a dog. He calls himself a fight nerd. And he fights you like Vanderlei Silva in his prime. This guy tries to take your head off with every punch. And you saw that on full display when he fought Weston Wilson in his last fight. Hooks and haymakers trying to just annihilate that guy. But the thing is, Charles Jourdain loves that kind of fight, man. He loves a back and forth firefight with his opponent. But he does it a lot more technically, with many more weapons, right? Front kicks, decent with the jab, will switch stances at times, put together combinations. And I think because the way John Silva is going to fight him, he's going to get right in his face and throw hands. You might see the best version of Charles Jourdain in this fight. Those are the kind of fights that Charles Jourdain actually shows the best of his abilities. And because of that, I do think it's going to be quite close. But the reason why I'm going with John Silva is ultimately the power difference between them two. Jourdain's got decent power, but he just doesn't hit like John Silva, man. I've seen John Silva knock a guy out with his leg in the air. Crazy stuff, man. He's knocked people out with flying knees, and he's nasty in the clinch with his knees and elbows. That one fight in the Contender Series, I mean, he really showed what he's able to do in the clinch. He can be wild at times, but he's sharp with some of the stuff that he throws that I think could catch Jourdain off guard. So I'm ultimately going to go with John Silva in this one. I think he's a slight underdog by a 3rd round TKO. Should be a very good fight. Then we go to Cub Swanson versus Andrei Fili. With a few more tats, these two guys are going to look like 2 shadows fighting each other. All inked up, man. Crazy. And they're just only getting started. Andrei Fili's already going up to his face and neck and stuff. But Cub Swanson, 40 years old, featherweight legend. Probably should be a Hall of Famer when he retires. He's done so much for the featherweight division. He's fought everybody almost. 5'8", 70-inch reach for the featherweight division. He's 29-13 professionally, coming off 1 win against Hakeem Dawodu, which was an impressive performance for a guy his age. You don't see a lot of 40-year-olds doing that well against much younger opponents. But before that, he got destroyed by Jonathan Martinez and has been exchanging wins and losses since 2020. Hasn't been too active either. Has fought once in 2022, fought once in 2020, fought twice in 2021, once in 2023. It seems like he might be retiring very, very soon. And Andrei Fili, he's 34 years old, 5'11", with a 74-inch reach, 23-11-1 professionally, coming off 1 loss, a destructive knockout loss to Dan Ige. When Dan Ige knocks you out, it's always so brutal. And Andrei Fili's been exchanging wins and losses since 2022, where he lost at Joe Anderson Brito, he won against Bill Aguayo, lost to Nathaniel Wood, beat Lucas Almeida, and then lost to Dan Ige. And I just don't think his chin is the same. I don't think it could be with the way he got knocked out by Dan Ige and a long time ago. Yair Rodriguez put him out. Joe Anderson Brito knocked him out in like 41 seconds. And the way that Cub Swanson throws his body behind all of his punches, I don't see Andrei Fili taking a shot like that. I really don't. And the crazy thing is, Cub Swanson has not been knocked out with a headshot since Jose Aldo back in 2009. This guy's been in so many wars, like against Duho Choi and Brian Ortega, Artem Lobov. Like, there's been a lot of crazy fights where he's taken a lot of damage, but they aren't able to knock him out with punches to the head. It's been leg kicks like when he fought Martinez, or body kicks like when he fought Giga Shikadze. His chin, even though he's 40 years old, might be fresher, or at least in a better state than Andrei Fili's. And he definitely punches way harder. He definitely has way more experience. He's more athletic. He's way faster. It's hard to say with the way he throws his shots that he's like technical with it, but he's skilled with what he does, right? He's quite sharp with some of the shots that he throws at his opponent. Even though they're haymakers and punches that start out wide all the way at an angle, he's able to land these on his opponents regularly, and it's quite strange, man. Andrei Fili's more of a textbook style where he's pumping out the jab from distance, using his reach, throwing out front kicks, 1-2 combinations, and tries to mix it up the best he can. And then you got Cub Swanson, who's fighting like a Tasmanian devil. And I think that could be a good style against such a longer opponent who doesn't really defend his chin that well, and his chin has been deteriorating by all the damage he's been taking. So I'm going to go with Cub Swanson here by a 2nd round knockout. I think he might land one of those big haymakers on Andrei Fili and put him down. Then we go to the 2nd most powerful puncher in human history, Joe Pyfer versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Joe Pyfer is 27 years old, 6'2", with a 75-inch reach in the middleweight division. He's 12-3 professionally, coming off 1 loss to Jack Hermanson. Before that, he was on a 4-fight win streak. All finishes, most of them coming by knockout. Marc-Andre Barriault is 34 years old, much older, 6'1", with a 74-inch reach. He's 16-7-1 professionally, coming off of 1 loss to Chris Curtis, split decision. Very, very close fight. Before that, he was on a 2-fight win streak against Eric Anders and Julian Marquez. I got Joe Pyfer. Gonna be probably more difficult than it is on paper, and he is a massive favorite going into the fight, but I think he's gonna have a major power advantage. And even though he does telegraph his punches a lot, right, he's throwing a lot of big haymakers and hooks without setting them up that well, and that's why he lost to Jack Hermanson. Just kept throwing power punches, but I think he learned a lot from that. I'm expecting a way better Joe Pyfer than the last time we saw him. Whereas Barriault has been very similar and consistent with all of his fights in the past few years. He's more well-rounded, right? He will go to the ground and try to submit you as well. You saw that when he fought Jourdain Wright. He's got good ground and pound. He's got decent striking, good kicks, good counter hook. Doesn't move his head as much as he probably should against Pyfer's punches, and that might be why Pyfer might land some of those shots. I do expect Barriault to try to take the fight to the ground, but as we've seen from Pyfer in his previous fights, the guy's very physically strong, man, and he's got underrated takedowns himself, so I wouldn't be surprised if he even took down Barriault at times, and that power and strength difference might be the reason as to why Pyfer wins the fight. So I'm going to go Joe Pyfer by a decision. I don't expect him to be as wild or as aggressive as we've seen him before. Kind of like in a learning process after that loss to Jack Hermanson. Not to do anything too crazy, you know. They're going to Mayra Bueno Silva versus Macy Chiasson. I'm going with Mayra Bueno Silva, better grappler. 3-round fights are definitely going to suit her much better than a 5-round fight like she had against Raquel Pennington. And Chiasson's just kind of big. She's tall, she's long, right? She's 5'11", 72-inch reach. She punches and kicks you from long range at times, and when she gets on top of you, it's very hard to shake her off because she's like a building on you, right? It's trying to like fight a tree off of your chest or off your back in Penny Kianzad's fight. But she makes a lot of technical mistakes, and I think especially on the ground is where she won't be able to get away with those. Mayra Bueno Silva is not the best skilled fighter, but when it comes to the ground game, she's very, very lethal. And I think if Chiasson gives up her neck, gives up her back or something, Silva's going to snatch onto that. And Silva's quite athletic. She's much faster. She hits very hard. The only thing about her is she gasses out very quickly and has a lot of mistakes technically in her stand-up. But I'm going to go with Silva because of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu difference between them two. Then we go to Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. On paper, I'd pick Anthony Smith against anybody. If you took away all their strengths, then Anthony Smith wins. But in the 3D world, it's a much closer fight. The only thing I don't like about Roman Dolidze stepping up is that he's stepping up, and he's a middleweight. Anthony Smith used to be a middleweight, but he was cutting way too much to get there. He's a real light heavyweight. Right? He should never have been in the middleweight division, whereas Roman, he's kind of big, but he's not as big as Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith is 35 years old. He's 6'4" with a 76-inch reach, 37-19 professionally, coming off a win against Vitor Petrino. Shocked everybody. Still don't know what Vitor was doing. I mean, they say his leg was hurt in the fight, so maybe that was why he shot the takedown like that and why he picked him up and held him in the air as long as he did before taking it to the ground. But huge mistake for Vitor Petrino. Showed a bit of a difference in experience between him and Smith. Smith's fought everybody from the middleweight and light heavyweight divisions, and over 50 professional fights is going to give you a natural advantage over anybody that has less. Roman Dolidze, though, is 35 years old, 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. He's 12-3 professionally with 2 losses in a row, but they're against Nasruddin Imavov and Marvin Vettori. Whereas Anthony Smith's losses are against Khalil Roundtree, Johnny Walker, and Magomed Ankalaev. The Ankalaev one I completely understand in recent years. Khalil Roundtree, dangerous puncher, right? Very, very explosive, but these guys are not on the level of Imavov, in my opinion. You know, right? Khalil Roundtree and Johnny Walker, for instance. Ankalaev, completely understand that guy's just very high level for the light heavyweight division, but come on, man, I think Roman Dolidze would have beaten Johnny Walker, honestly. So here's the thing. If Roman Dolidze had a training camp, right, he prepared for Anthony Smith, he got bigger for the weight class, I think he probably would beat Smith. But because Smith has a bit of a head start here with preparation, getting in shape, getting ready for 3 rounds, he's been fighting at 205 for how many years now? Roman's been fighting at middleweight for a long time. Roman's body is not naturally ready for 170 like Anthony Smith's is. And Roman Dolidze fights very heavy off of his strength, his power, and stuff like that. If he cannot take Smith to the ground, he's probably going to be in a lot of trouble. He's a way better grappler, in my opinion, than he is a striker, technically speaking. Smith is a black belt, like Alex Pereira is, but a bit more legit because he's been a black belt for a very long time. He's got a lot of submission wins. His last win was a guillotine submission. So without the readiness of size and strength and cardio, I don't think Roman is going to be in his best state to beat someone like Anthony Smith if he cannot take the fight to the ground and grapple with this guy. If Smith takes him to the ground or drops him in some kind of way and gets on top of Roman's going to be in a lot of trouble, man. And on the stand-up, Roman's very slow. He's very obvious with what he throws out there. Sometimes his slow tempo can catch you off guard with like a high kick or something. But Smith being the taller and longer guy, he doesn't have to Roman's going to have to get in on Smith. And Smith just has to jab and counter, keep distance on Roman. And because Roman is so slow, I think Smith might jab him up, hit him with right-hand counters, teep him to the body, keep him away for most of the fight, and cause Roman to get a lot more desperate with his power punches and his takedowns. So I'm going to go with Anthony Smith here, and I'm going to go by a 3rd round TKO. But crazy enough, Roman Dolidze is the favorite going into the fight. He's a minus 144, and Anthony Smith is a plus 118. So if you guys want to capitalize on these odds, go to MyBookie mybookie.ag, they got a load of very interesting lines here. So as I just said, Roman Dolidze minus 144. I think they're going mostly off of the fact that Anthony Smith is older. He's clearly not in his prime anymore, whereas Roman Dolidze arguably is in his prime. So I do like Anthony Smith as an underdog for sure, but probably a fight I would avoid betting in general. Alex Pereira is a minus 138 against the plus 113 Jiri Prochazka. That's a fight I would completely avoid. Anything can happen with these two guys. It's so wild, so unpredictable, short notice fight, but I do think it's going to end by a knockout one way or the other. I'll get into that fight later in the video. Diego Lopes is a minus 149 against the plus 121 Brian Ortega. Another fight I would probably avoid. Very unpredictable fight. Mayra Bueno Silva is a underdog, very slight, minus 107 against the minus 115 Macy Chiasson. I think Silva should win that fight. Garry minus 150 against the plus 122 Michael Page. I'll leave that for my thoughts later in the video. Joe Pyfer is a minus 300 against the plus 236 Marc-Andre Barriault. I'm not gonna lie, man, I like Barriault on those odds. I don't think Pyfer is that big of a favorite at all, especially if he didn't make many adjustments and fix up his mistakes from the Jack Hermanson fight. I can see Barriault even winning the fight. I'm picking Pyfer because I think he's going to look better, but I don't know that for certain. If he was like a minus 150, then I think those are better odds for Pyfer, but he's a minus 300. Even if he wins, that's not much of a return. And it's not even a confident pick. Barriault on those odds is not bad. Andrei Fili is a huge favorite against Cub Swanson, minus 255 against a plus 202. I think Swanson wins that. If it was closer on the odds, I would say that's a fight not to bet on at all. But the fact that Cub Swanson is a plus 202 and Fili's chin has been touched up a bit too much, I do like Cub Swanson as an underdog, especially as big as he is. John Silva, very slight underdog, minus 107 against the minus 114 Charles Jourdain. This is a fight I would avoid. Both guys can win that fight. It's way too close. Payton Talbott, the biggest favorite on the card by a large margin, minus 1786. Sounds like a year, against the plus 870 Yanis Ghemmouri. You don't win anything betting on Payton Talbott. If you put like $10, you'll win like a penny or something. You know, it's like not even worth it. Or you win like 10 cents or whatever it is. Honestly, with those odds, because what is there to lose? I would put like a very small amount on Yanis Ghemmouri personally. You know, whenever you see odds like that, it's never a good sign for the big favorite. Gillian Robertson is a favorite, a minus 184 against the plus 149 Michelle Waterson Gomez. I'm definitely going Jillian Robertson. Martin Buday, minus 255 against the plus 200 Andrei Arlovski. I personally am not going to bet on this fight because I do think Arlovski is going to win, but I'm not confident at all about it. The only way I would bet on Arlovski is in a parlay of underdogs. That's the only way. Or on the live bets if he is doing well. Ray Tsuruya is a minus 481 against the plus 350 Carlos Hernandez. Makes sense. Ricky Simone is a minus 240 against the plus 190 Vinicius Oliveira. I am very surprised Oliveira is the underdog, especially with the way that Vinicius Oliveira has been winning his fights. I really like Vinicius as an underdog. But you guys can pick whatever you want, and you don't have to just go with the straight picks. You can bet on the wagers, which is like the methods of victory, or if the fight's going to end by a knockout or something like that. Or you can go by a parlay, matching up fighters you're confident in winning to multiply your earnings. And there's many different strategies on doing that, right? You can pick a lot of underdogs, you can pick a lot of favorites, but then one big underdog to kind of soften up. But if you are confident in that underdog winning, and my book is giving you a deposit bonus for your first deposit, they'll match up whatever you put in all the way up to $1,000. You could use it on UFC fights, you could use it on different sports, whatever you want. Doesn't have to be just one specific thing, but all you got to do is use the promo code WEASEL. That's WEASLE. When you sign up, it'll match up whatever you put in all the way up to $1,000. It will come with a rollover withdrawal requirement. And make sure to go to mybookie.ag today where you can win big. And with that, let's go right to the featured fights, best fights on the card. We are going to start with Ian Machado Garry versus Michael Venom Page. I think this is the first time an Irish fighter is fighting an English fighter in UFC history. I could be wrong on that, but I think this is the first time. And they did originally want to put that on the 304 card in Manchester. But with all the pullouts on the card, with all the fighters getting injured and stuff, they got to stack it better, you know. So with Ian Machado Garry versus Michael Page on this, it's going to be way better. And it's a striking match. I would be very intrigued if Machado tries to take the fight to the ground. The guy would be the ultimate troll if he tries. They've been actually taking digs at each other's striking style for a few interviews now. And imagine if Ian Garry comes out there wrestling. Now, Michael Page's ground game has been very underestimated throughout his career. He's got a few good submissions. He's been able to hold his own in many different matchups where he did get taken to the ground. He's not completely helpless once his back touches the mat. He's also a very long, tall, athletic, fast guy, even at his age, and he could surprise a guy as young as Ian Garry, who probably's thinking Michael Page should not be able to physically handle him once he starts getting more physical with Michael Page. But here's the thing, technically speaking, I do like Ian Garry's style against Michael Page in general. I think the leg kick's going to be devastating. I think he has a very good check left hook on him. He's fast with the 1-2s and the combinations with the high kicks and stuff. Michael Page's bounce that he has, where he's constantly bouncing back and forth, could get timed by Ian Garry's leg kicks, right? That was something that kind of happened with Douglas Lima, right? When Douglas Lima kicked out his leg and then knocked him out with an uppercut. But if you do remember in the second fight, Lima tried the same thing. He kicked his leg out, threw an uppercut again, and Michael Page adjusted. He actually moved away from it. He got up from the bottom way more intelligently than he did the first time they fought. Michael Page is a very intelligent fighter. And actually, when you listen to him break down his opponents and break down other fights, he has a very good eye for the game, man. Even though he says that he doesn't even watch fights like that. But of all the fighters that he sees, he analyzes them very well. And I think he's going to do the same thing against Ian Garry. I mean, the way that he fights, the style that he has to be intelligent in that way. Because every mistake that he makes is drastically open for the opponent to knock him out. Just because of the way he fights. Hands down, chin in the air, bouncing back and forth, committing full power punches from distance. It's an extremely risky style. You have to be intelligent to succeed with it. Now, Ian Garry doesn't usually fight as the shorter opponent, right? His reach is much shorter than Michael Page's. The only other time he had that was with Neil Magny, but Magny's not a striker like that, right? He doesn't have that much power. He doesn't really have many variety or dangerous striking skills compared to anybody else Ian Garry's actually fought before. So it's different, right? Michael Page is a very dangerous puncher, incredibly dangerous kicker, very, very fast, very, very athletic and dynamic with everything he does. It's a different fight for Ian Garry, just with the dimensions and the attributes. And he has to get in on Michael Page with his hands specifically. Or he's going to wait for Michael Page to get in on him when he's blitzing him down. So it's going to be a much more patient fight for Ian Garry specifically. The main aggressive technique he can go to are those leg kicks, because Michael Page doesn't really check those. And it's going to force MVP to do something aggressively and maybe a bit too risky, right? If he's getting kicked out from distance, it might force MVP to just throw that 1-2 from distance and then he gets countered by a left hook and knocked out. That can easily happen here off of those leg kicks. But on the other side, if Michael Page stays right in front of Garry in boxing range, but a little bit far out where Garry has to actually move forward to land his punches and Michael Page can just pop in jabs from his stance, that's going to be a lot more dangerous for Ian Garry. It's a little close in kicking range. At the end of punching range, Ian Garry can eat a lot of jabs and 1-2s from that distance. I just don't know if MVP is going to fight that way though. And Garry will drop his hands at times after throwing punches. So it's a very, very tough fight to call. It's a close fight, but I'm going to go with Michael Page. Sometimes I don't like the way that Ian Garry stands at range the way he does. He plods at times and his kicks aren't always set up behind his punches. You know, if he's throwing out light kicks and Michael Page times those, he's going to fly right over the kick with a 1-2 and knock Ian Garry out. With the shots he hit Kevin Holland with, Ian Garry's not taking those same shots. One right hand from Michael Page can start making him do the hokey pokey, and MVP could finish him off from there. So I'm going to go with Michael Venom Page by a second round knockout. But it's a very close fight, man. Very, very close. Ian Garry can absolutely win this fight, even though a lot of people don't like him. The guy can fight, man. He's got very good striking skills, and if he fights behind the leg kick while masking it up behind his punches, MVP could get knocked out. What is the co-main event? I'm glad you asked. An eagle has landed in the cage, and his name is Brian Ortega, the purger himself, the man who doesn't need to breathe during fights and sparring, the man who's changing fighting as we know it, and he's going up against the best, Diego Lopes. He's the man. He's the guy at featherweight. We're all waiting for him to fight for the title one day, and it's crazy the rise this guy has had since becoming a short notice replacement against Movsar Evloev for his UFC debut. Isn't that crazy how his entire UFC career started as a short notice replacement, and now people are looking at him as a future title challenger, potentially a rival of Ilia Topuria? This guy's on a 3-fight win streak, all first round finishes, man. Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, and Sadiq Youssef. That Youssef win was so incredibly impressive. Nobody thought he'd run through him like that. I mean, Youssef had a style on paper to beat Diego Lopes, but when you have that kind of power, man, when you're that big for a featherweight, those punches land differently, and Ortega might feel that power as well. Ortega's taken a lot of damage throughout his career, especially from the Volkanovski and Max Holloway fights, but even back in the day against Cub Swanson, he took some shots against Korean Zombie. His boxing defense has never really been that good, and once Diego Lopes starts landing punches on that chin, I don't know how many Ortega can absorb. Eating shots from a man this size, and it's not just that, the way Diego Lopes even throws his punches, man. Fully committed, full leverage, momentum-driven power punches. He's trying to unalive you with every single thing he throws. And on top of that, Ortega doesn't really have that natural jiu-jitsu advantage he could just fall back on. You know, if things get too dangerous in the stand-up, he could kind of go for a takedown or pull guard or something like that. Lopes is very dangerous on the ground as well. I think Ortega's a bit better there, but it's going to be a fight on the ground as well. And it's going to be interesting if Ortega can actually get him down with like a double leg or something. Now, the reason why I'm skipping over a lot of Ortega's stand-up skills is because he honestly didn't look that good against Yair. In the stand-up specifically, he looked slower than I've ever seen him before. His technique was very obvious. It looked like he really didn't make a lot of good adjustments in his stand-up in the past few years. The last time we saw Ortega do something extraordinary in the stand-up where he looked obviously better was against Korean Zombie. But that fight was back in 2020, which shows his inactivity, right? He fought once in 2020, once in 2021, once in 2022, and then he fought earlier this year in 2024. Diego Lopes cranked out 3 wins in less than a year's time. So that's another thing going for Diego Lopes. He's constantly getting better. He's constantly getting more experience. He's been very active. I think he hits harder than Ortega. He's bigger than Ortega. He has a very good ground game. Ortega's taking a lot of shots to the chin. He's talking so weird now. I don't know what he's doing. Like, he's taping his mouth shut in sparring. That's dangerous to do. You don't allow yourself to breathe, and that can actually cause some kind of brain damage if you're taking shots and you can't breathe well. So I'm going to go Diego Lopes in this fight, and I'm going to go by a decision win. I think he will rock Ortega in the fight. In fact, Yair, I believe, dropped Ortega, so that chin is definitely withering. And if Diego Lopes happens to be the only fighter to knock Ortega out without a doctor stoppage, I'm talking about clear-cut knockout, give this guy a title shot then. Like, what are we waiting for at that point? And then we go to the main event. Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka 2. The rematch we never knew we wanted, but we're definitely craving it now. The reincarnated warriors of the past. The Brazilian hunter going up against the Viking samurai hybrid. There never really was one in history, but Jiri's the first. Shaman magic versus chakra and chi. There's a spiritual battle happening while this fight is physically happening. It's crazy how much on the spectrum this fight actually is. And the funniest thing is, they're both dead serious about all of it. Jiri honestly believes Pereira is doing some kind of shaman magic that helps him win. And he's asking Pereira to just not do that anymore and fight this physically. Jiri also believes in his whole chakra stuff that he does. And Pereira's telling him, right, he responded to that request and said, you should start doing shaman magic as well. It definitely helps. Like, what is going on here? These guys are on performance enhancing magic. And now we're going to need spiritual doctors to stop these guys from taking these PEMs. No, I'm just kidding. But the fight itself should be very interesting. They're both taken up on rather short notice, not a full training camp. These guys both fought in 300 a couple months ago. Pereira had some broken toes. Prochazka took a lot of kicks to the leg and a lot of punches to the face. He seems to be healthy, but it doesn't matter how good that chin is. If Pereira touches him, Jiri's probably going to get TKO'd. Jiri doesn't check leg kicks that well. He moved away from a couple of them in the first fight, but like 1 or 2 of them caused enough damage on the leg for Jiri to be somewhat compromised in his stand-up, right? In fact, I think it was like the first right round kick on the leg that knocked Jiri off his feet. And he was doing a good job in that fight by being as unpredictable as possible. And you can see that Pereira had a hard time with the pressure that Prochazka put on him, right? Especially that time where Pereira's back was on the fence and Jiri was giving him all these kind of dips and leans and ducks and all this crazy head movement. Pereira didn't know how to fire his punches at him. He was missing all of it. And then Jiri found the openings because of those missed punches from Pereira and counter him with some big shots. But that element of surprise, that unpredictable style is not going to be as much of a factor in the rematch because Pereira has a better understanding of Jiri's rhythm, the way he fights, the openings he presents, the way he likes to get aggressive on his opponents and all this stuff, right? His speed, his power. He has a much better understanding of the unpredictable fighter. That naturally is going to give you a better shot in the rematch. Automatically. It's not going to take him as much time to understand Jiri Prochazka in this fight. So anytime Jiri gets very funky out there and opens up his chin, He could get knocked out a lot sooner, but Jiri is definitely going to have to wrestle a lot more. Everybody who fights Pereira has to wrestle a lot more. I don't understand why all these fighters want to challenge Pereira in his style. They should all be shooting doubles and singles on this guy. And Jiri had a lot of success when he wrestled in their first fight. He took him to the ground, he was able to hold him down for a long time, and he would just need to build on top of that. But Pereira is a black belt now, so it's definitely not going to work. He's going to submit Jiri Prochazka with a guillotine, and that ultimately goes to the prediction of this fight. I'm going to go with Alex Pereira by a second round knockout. I think Jiri's going to open up his chin. I think Pereira's going to land like a 1-2 combo, and then maybe finish him off with a left hook, making the win emphatic this time. No controversial early stoppage. So those are my predictions for the 303 card. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to leave your predictions in the comments below as well.